At first glance, running with rifles doesn't seem like much, particularly if you've only seen screenshots and never gameplay. Appearances can be deceiving however, and Modulatio have crafted one of the most enjoyable and challenging tactical shooters that I've played in recent times. It just goes to show, you can't judge a game by its cover. Running with rifles has a playstyle that's very reminiscent of the Cannon Fodder franchise of yesteryear. It's a top-down shooter with some light RPG elements and some not so light RPGs. What I got was a game I've played from a first-person perspective many times, but never from a top-down perspective. The game initially casts you as just one more cog in the machine, though as you rank up you'll find your place in the army becomes more important. Each map in the game has a variety of objectives that you're tasked with completing, like taking and holding positions, freeing prisoners, or blowing up an enemy communications tower. What you'll find yourself doing most often, however, is alternately slaughtering endless hordes of enemies, or cowering behind a rock and hoping no grenades come your way. The wholesale slaughter of your foe can get monotonous at times, particularly when you realise that you have to hold all of the control points on a map for a certain amount of time before the game will let you progress to the next part. This is pretty difficult even on lower settings, as you'll find your enemy is quite adept at capitalising on a weak point in your line, and before you know it they've clawed back a bunch of points. It's not uncommon to get stuck in a stalemate, with the map cleanly divided down the middle and neither side being able to muster enough men for a decisive push. Dying is a pretty common occurrence in running with rifles, and there's plenty of ways for you to be shuffled off this mortal coil. Obviously there's the bullets coming your way, but you also need to be wary of your own teammates reversing over you, or the enemy tanks bulldozing their way through your lines. Most deaths are pretty quick affairs, as much like real life soldiers, it doesn't take much lead to stop one. One of the minor gripes I have is that the size of the maps can sometimes make dying a lot more inconvenient, leaving you to trek across large areas of the map to get back to the action. The game features a progression system which is linked to whatever server you've been playing on. Unfortunately, it seems as though running with rifles makes it easier to level up once you're actually leveled up. As a rookie fresh out of boot camp, you won't have access to much equipment as it's all locked behind experience and reputation barriers, and while the default rifle can do some work, you'll sadly not have access to things like C4, which are pretty important to take out hard objectives like prison doors and supply trucks. Once you've got a few levels under your belt, the game does open up wonderfully, and you'll have all the right tools for the situation you're trying to tackle. Combat is a fairly straightforward affair once you work out what you're doing. You point your gun, pull the trigger and hope that the target drops to the ground. There are a few issues with the top-down presentation, as it makes it difficult to gauge line of sight past smaller bits of cover and inclines. The game does intelligently include a slight shadowing effect that will indicate when you don't have a clear shot, but it's really easy to miss in the moment, and you may not even notice that your bullets are impacting a small rock a few feet ahead of the target you're trying to take down. Your stance affects your weapon's accuracy, so you'll need to make sure you're using that to full effect. If there's time, it's best to stop moving and either crouch or go prone to ensure the shot hits. Running with rifles features a pretty robust cover system, and pretty much anything that looks like it might stop bullets will. You'll run into issues again with a top-down perspective, as it's not always clear if the box you're hiding behind is actually hiding you, or if it's just nicely framing your head for the guy with the sniper rifle. Amusingly, I found that running with my rifle was sometimes more effective than going to ground. I touched on this earlier, but I wanted to talk about the AI a little bit more, as it's one of the game's selling points. The Steam page reads, "Emergent AI that will question if you're as smart as you think you are," and they're not joking about that at all. The AI is completely capable of taking advantage of each and every mistake you make, especially if they've gotten hold of a tank. Some squads you'll take down without issue, but they could also easily be the bait for a second squad that's about to come over a ridge in a flanking maneuver, and you quickly find yourself doing the walk of shame back from the closest deployment zone. By now you've probably gathered that running with rifles is a pretty tough game. Luckily there's a whole slew of settings you can tweak to either make the game go easier on you, or if you're a little bit warped you can go the other way and make it a lot harder. Even with the settings knocked down, the enemy gives you a tough fight, and you'll find it can take some time to complete objectives, which leads me to another gripe. As fun as the game is, there's no real sense of accomplishment to be had until you've cleared the entire map. Running with rifles is not a bad looking game, but the abundant use of browns, greens and greys can make things look a little bit muddy and sometimes make it difficult to pick details out. The cel-shaded art style looks pretty good though, colour palette complaints aside. Where running with rifles shines is the sound design. The weapons all have appropriately terrifying sounds when there's lead coming down range, and if you listen carefully you can sometimes hear the enemy coming long before they're in position to make themselves a nuisance. The music in the menus can get a little overbearing though, and I've now turned that off so I can try and get it out of my head. If you've watched many of my reviews, you'll have quickly learned that I'm a big fan of co-op games, and running with rifles is a fantastic addition to that library for me. You potentially have the ability to turn this into a massively multiplayer game, as there's no real limitations to the number of players in a server, except for the hardware that you're running it on. I've had an absolute blast buddying up with a friend and trying to take down the oppressive grey collar regime together. It's worth noting that there's a somewhat active modding community for Running with Rifles. I've only tried out a few, but if you get this game I'd recommend checking out the mods Running with the Dead and Running with XCOM. While many of the mods seem to be hasty reskins, these two add quite a lot of content and are worth giving a try if you'd like to change things up a bit. Installing mods can be a little obtuse initially, but once you successfully managed it once, you'll have no problems after that. This is the part of the review where I would usually tell you if I think this game is worth picking up, but I think at this point you're going to know if this is the kind of game you're going to be interested in. Running with Rifles is brutally difficult, but also loads of fun. I hope to see you on the battlefield.